This is Professor Mike Ventola from Sandhills Community College, bringing you Grass of the Week. We're back for our fourth Grass of the Week. Actually, we're going to talk about two grasses today. This is our first venture away from the bluegrasses, so we're going to look at the ryegrasses. So these ryegrasses have no boat-shaped leaf tip, and they have no racing stripes. They're going to have another leaf characteristic, though. Both are going to be quite waxy on the back. So the frontal leaf is going to be a very distinct, different color from the back of the leaf. The perennial ryegrass is Lolium perennium. The annual ryegrass is Lolium multiflorium. So as you might guess, multiflorium means many flowers. So this is another prolific seed-producing grass like the Poa annua. And here is probably one of the mother lodes of ryegrass. This is obviously Augusta National. This is a look back at the clubhouse. Here's the clubhouse up here, the big tree you see up at 18. Augusta National Golf Course is a 100% ryegrass golf course. So I want you to go to, and that's perennial ryegrass, not annual ryegrass. So go to page 13 in your book. And we're going to see that our perennial ryegrass is folded. Annual ryegrass is going to be rolled. So that will be our first rolled grass. But we want to look at our folded grass, and it's going to be on page 32. So we can look across here and follow across on that line with our next slide. So perennial ryegrass, Lolium perennium, has a folded vernation. The ligule is small, 0.5 millimeters, and membranous. The auricle is small, near claw-like. So it's not wrapping all the way around. It's less than we're going to see on the annual ryegrass, but it is there. There is a little bit of an auricle. It's a bunch-type grass, so this grass does not spread by rhizomes or stolons. So when we seed it, which is what predominantly it's going to be used for in the golf industry, we overseed, and we have to use a lot of seed. So this is a commodity grass. This is a grass that's sold quite a bit by the seed producers. It has a flat, a little bit reddish sheath. The collar's divided at the midrib, but again, that's not one of the big ID things. And the narrow blade is narrow, and it's waxy on the back. So that's the big feature that I use to identify, to distinguish this grass from particularly the tall fescues that we're going to talk about later. The other thing you see with ryegrass is this striping pattern. This is from the backs of the leaf blade. This is not the best picture, but it's a picture of pine needles, and pine needles is another golf course that overseeds. And when you mow the grass, when the mower goes one way, it pushes the blade so you see the back, and then it comes this way so you see the front. So you get that nice pattern. You see that on football games. It's something that you don't really see on other grasses as much. So that's the waxy leaf blade. Folded, claw-like auricles, reddish at the base, bunch-type growth. So the things that we went over before. Another Augusta picture. You can see I'm here on the bridge. See, even at Augusta, they can't grow too much grass in the shade, so they have artificial turf on the Hogan Bridge there. But that's the 12th hole, and you can see the ryegrass is really, really lush and fertilized there. This is again up at Dr. Melody Frazier's, and you can see again we have plots. If you look closely, you can see a little bit of difference, but there's not a lot of genetic variability in the ryegrasses, and that's why it's really a commodity you can buy. This is one of the golf maintenance companies. This is probably their biggest savings, is they can buy ryegrass in a big bulk. It train loads full, exactly. But you can see this waxy back. You can see where the mowers went, and that's very distinct, where you can't tell any difference in these grasses, but when the mowers went this way, you can see a little bit. So I think that's a good example. If you look back to the one we did on Kentucky bluegrass, you could really see the plots. But here, the ryegrass is pretty much the same for all the cultivars. So here's Dr. Fred Yelverton. He's doing some research on ryegrass and taking it out of Bermuda grass, one of the grasses we're going to talk about later. This is a field that was not overseeded for a year but got all this big clumpy ryegrass, and it's much harder to control when it's clumpy and it lives through. So these are some of the chemicals that they're testing, and you can obviously see that one works pretty well. I think that was a higher rate of Roundup. Here might have been a lower rate of Roundup, but you can see that in this box the Bermuda grass is already greening up. At the high rate, the Roundup, which is a growth regulator, has made that color much lighter, and it has regulated the growth, so it's not growing as much. And this is a pretty interesting study because superintendents are always trying to get the ryegrass out, the annual ryegrass out, so that the Bermuda can grow. So some of the breeding, when they've improved the ryegrasses, they've made them more heat tolerant, and that's really not something that southern turf managers want. In the north, that's good if you've got a field. So what happened is then they went back and they looked at this and they came up with a grass called Phantom. It's a great name because what they wanted is the grass to go away. So it's a difficult thing to breed for, as you might imagine, because if it goes away, you don't have the seed. But they keep the other seed alive, and they're testing. So they're trying to put germplasm back in that is not as heat tolerant. It's been a great idea. It's probably been in the works for 8 or 10 years. It really hasn't come to market because, again, the commodity and the price. So the name Phantom is probably better than actually the grass in reality is. And we do have some chemicals, mainly Curb and then a new one called Monument, that are good at that. So read the labels on any of the chemicals. I'm not recommending them, but those are being used in the trade right now. So you can see here's a beautiful picture of Forest Creek, and you can see the ryegrass. Forest Creek is another golf course. It's pretty much a ryegrass golf course. The majority of their members are people that live in the north. They come down in the spring and fall to play, and you can see that they enjoy this really lush green color like Augusta. Bill Patton's got the azaleas here, and he's got the mowing going, and you can see the striping from that mowing. So the really lush green color. The ryegrass, the annual ryegrass, really accepts nitrogen and really gets green. So the annual ryegrass is a different grass. It's not of the quality of the perennial ryegrass. Lolium multiflorium, it looks quite a bit like tall fescue. There's two real ways to distinguish them. One is the blade margins. The blade margins on annual ryegrass are smooth. The blade margins on tall fescue are rough. But even more, the clasping auricle. So this is the first time we're going to see a grass with a clasping auricle. Both of these grasses are going to be rolled. The annual ryegrass has a really the most distinct clasping auricle, where that auricle really comes out of the blade and comes around and clasps it like your arms grabbing around there. So if we would have the legule, but you'll see almost arms grabbing around the blade right where the blade comes out of the sheath. It has a lighter green color. You can see this grass. Big wide leaf blade. It can be a problem on roadsides. You should read your book about that a little bit. It talks about the difference between annual ryegrass and quackgrass. Quackgrass does have some rhizomes. The seed head looks a little bit similar. The seed heads will get big. Another thing about this grass, it is a true annual. So once it seeds, it dies. So this is the contractor mix we talk about, and our guest speaker Kale is going to talk about that a little bit. But somebody will put out this annual ryegrass. Contractor will put it out because it germinates really, really fast. This is the fastest germinating grass. Germinates sometimes in 3 to 5 days, and you can have turf up, which is nice for a contractor that needs to get it covered to sell the area. But that next summer, people say, well, I watered and watered my grass, and there's nothing there because it all died. It was an annual grass, so you would have to reseed it. So in your book, this will be the first rolled grass. So if you take that in your finger and you roll it, you'll find that it does not flip like all the grasses we've talked about so far. It rolls. So I want you to find that and go along. You can see where fescue might key out. You can see fescue's number 26 there, and then our ryegrass is right up above it on page 31. So you want to follow along, and those are similar till they get to that end point. So good thing to do, practice going through these keys to get ready for your exams. Okay. So it's got rolled vernation. It's got a ligule that's 1 to 2 millimeters, and membranous. The real kicker is that auricle. So I want you to look close at that auricle in your lab because you'll be able to see it's really clasping. It really comes around. Quackgrass is clasping also, but I think that this, telling this from tall fescue, that's really the distinguished feature. It's a bunch type grass, so it's not going to fill in and it's going to die. So it's again a seed producer. The sheath is a little bit split and overlapped. The collar is not hairy. And the blade is broad, so it has a much broader blade, a much lighter color. If you're growing annual ryegrass and perennial ryegrass in the same field with the same amount of nitrogen, the color will be different. This grass will be lighter. You can trick this grass a little bit. I had my lawn a couple years ago where we had taken out a bunch of trees and I didn't really want to put the zoysia grass out there, so I put annual ryegrass because I wanted to get it in there good, but I fertilized it quite often, really low rate, so I fertilized every couple of weeks because it was a small yard, and it tricked people to thinking it was regular ryegrass, and it looked pretty good and green. Once I stopped fertilizing that, it really turned to a light color. So where you need to be careful, if you're buying seed from any of the seed merchants around here and you want to overseed, if you look at the anatomy of a seed, there's a rachella, that's basically where it's attached to the stem. There's a palea and the lemma, those are food for the little seed that's in there, the small plant. But there's this structure that really doesn't have any purpose, and it's called an awn. There's our awn. And then when I think of awn, in these two grasses particularly, we've got creeping bentgrass and colonial bentgrass. Those are real small, and we're not going to talk about those right now. But when we talk about the perennial ryegrass, in the annual ryegrass, and it's not on every one, but you can see there's an awn here, there's an awn here. They do get broken off, but no perennial ryegrass will have an awn, and the annual ryegrass will definitely have an awn. So that's what you want to be aware of. And the reason we want to be aware of that is that seed, and here's another close-up picture, the cost of seed, and you're buying thousands and thousands of pounds of ryegrass seed a year. When annual ryegrass seed a couple years back was 40 cents a pound, the perennial ryegrass seed was about double, and the cost of seed has gone up even more this last year, and the cost of trucking. So this awn, if you have an awn on something you think is perennial ryegrass, you're being cheated. And there was an example, a court case that I was involved in with bentgrass, not with the ryegrasses, where we had to grow the seed up and get the seed out and show that this was colonial bentgrass and not creeping bentgrass, and it was a much cheaper seed. So you want to be aware that an awn on the seed, I'm going to go back to that, an awn here up on the seed is makes it a less expensive seed when we're talking about ryegrasses. We'll kick through that. So that concludes what I wanted to talk about ryegrass. Picture this gentleman here. This is Dr. Cale Bigelow. He's in charge of the turfgrass management program up at Purdue University, and there's a lot more annual ryegrass there. So I had a nice phone conversation with Dr. Bigelow, and we're going to include that into the video cast right after this test. So I'll talk to you next week. Cale Bigelow, professor of turfgrass management at Purdue University. On the line today, our grass of the week is annual ryegrass. So, Cale, the first thing I wanted to ask you was, when you go out looking at grasses, how do you identify annual ryegrass?
When I look at any grass, you're probably looking at three major characteristics, and those would be the ligule of the grass, the leaf, and the leaf blade, and for auricles. One of the things about annual ryegrass is it has a very pointed leaf tip, and additionally, you want to be looking at the vernation, or how the first new leaf is coming out of the leaf sheath. Annual rye is going to have a rolled vernation, and it's also going to have, in a mature state, these very distinctive clasping claw-like auricles that wrap around the leaf sheath. Additionally, you can look for things like the overall color of the grass, and annual ryegrasses tend to be very, very Granny Smith apple yellow. It's an undesirable yellow color, but it's also got a relatively coarse leaf texture in terms of its leaf width compared to more desirable grasses. Things like Kentucky bluegrass, perennial ryegrass are much, much more fine-leaved than annual ryegrass. Another thing that you can look for with annual ryegrass, and you'll see this with annual rye, perennial rye, and most of the tall fescues, and down near the crown area, when they're mature, they have a reddish pigment to them, and that might help you identify it as well.
Great. So what uses do you see for annual ryegrass, Dr. Bigelow?
I would use it in very, very few situations. It generally performs as a very, very poor turf. It's not a persistent turf. In our region, even in Indiana, where we have more mild summers than folks down south, it will still disappear in the summer months. It's not uncommon in many of our lawn and landscape situations for contractors, especially people that are doing hydroseeding or trying to establish a lawn as inexpensively as possible, to include annual ryegrass as part of the mixture. And it comes up very, very quickly into the first week. Whoever installed the lawn looks like a hero, but usually once the humidity comes along, this grass disappears very, very quickly. Where we have seen some success with annual ryegrass is in overseeding situations. There are some more what they're calling turf-type annual ryegrasses on the market. Some people are using those to overseed not extremely high-quality areas, but some home lawns and things like that.
Actually, the college here in Pinehurst, we overseed some of the areas with annual ryegrass.
Okay. Certain situations through January and February, it looks okay, but generally once you get even a mildly hot day, it looks very, very
right.
poor.
And then we're overseeing centipede, so it
Right.
seems to be less of a stress on the centipede.
Exactly. It would work okay there. It's going to disappear very, very quickly, but you better be ready for it to disappear because it will go pretty fast.
Now, what would a situation where you would definitely not want to use annual ryegrass?
Like I said, as any type of a persistent turf in a home lawn, I would not consider using it. One of the other problems with annual ryegrass is consumers tend to buy things based on price, and seed companies tend to have a lot of their seed containing annual ryegrass in the garden centers. If you look at the back of a bag of seeds on the seed label, you'll find quite a bit of annual ryegrass in there. And the reason for that is it's a pretty inexpensive grass to produce, and they bulk up a lot of seed years with annual ryegrass. And homeowners want pretty quick satisfaction, so they put this out there and it germinates very, very quickly, and they think they're getting a quality lawn, and it oftentimes disappears much, much more quickly.
Well, great. Cale, did you have any interesting story that you can remember when your dealings with this grass?
I've had a lot of calls from homeowners and things related to home lawns and annual ryegrass, and typically we'll establish our cool season grasses in the fall of the year, and people sometimes establish with a lawn seed mixture and think they're getting a bluegrass lawn, a little bit of bluegrass in the seed mixture, and come the next spring, that annual ryegrass is disappearing in May or June, and for their bluegrass, and it's not there, and they'll sometimes really have some very strong questions of what happened to my lawn. The other thing with annual ryegrass is it's fairly disease susceptible, and that can cause some issues in terms of it disappearing much more quickly than you want it to. But again, not something I would generally recommend or use, but it does have a few situations it might be okay. Some people have used it as a nurse grass, along with a more desirable grass, like maybe even a Bermuda grass. You're seeding just to try and stabilize the soil, but it's also very, very competitive as a seedling, and often will crowd out your desirable grasses in the seedling stage.
Great. Now, do you see any increased or decreased use of this grass in the future?
As I mentioned, there is someone that's breeding these turf-type annual ryegrasses. In certain situations, maybe it's going to make some sense, but until they get a grass that isn't as unattractive in terms of color, something that mows a little bit more cleanly, and something that doesn't have the rapid growth rate, it's not something that I'm going to recommend, so hopefully people aren't going to use it very much.
Is this that person at Rutgers?
No, I think he's in Texas A&M.
Because I know Dr. Funk was always trying to get a graduate student to look a little closer at annual ryegrass, and everybody thought he was crazy. But,
well, never say never with anything. So
yeah.
There are some characteristics of it that might not be too bad, but I'm a tall fescue kind of person. The turf-type tall fescues are far superior to the annual ryegrasses.
Great talking to you, Cale. Really appreciate it. The Grass of the Week music is the Sand Hills Community College Jazz Band, directed by Tim Haley.